Hi, in this demonstration video, we will show the necessary steps to establish a connection from Power BI to Hector API in order to fetch data for reporting needs within Power BI. As a first step to establish the connection from Power BI to Hector, we will need to use an account in Hector. To do so for this purpose, we have created an account specific to this, which we've named Service Power BI, with this email and a password which we have already noted down here. We will need to reuse this information later on in Power BI. So this user needs to be an administrator in order to get all of the necessary data and have access to it. So this is the first step. Once this is done, we can open PowerBI Desktop and the sample file So this file is available in the knowledge base article and can be downloaded from there. Once we have this file, we can open it here. So this file is pre-configured with different functions, which will help to establish the connection to Hector. As you may notice, there's no data currently available in this file. This will be something that we do in a later step. Now, as the first step to get the data, we need to set up the connection parameters. To do so, we can head to the Transform Data section here to open the Power Query Editor. And from here, we have access to the 3 parameters necessary to establish the connection to the Hector API. So the first value that we need to set up is the name of our instance. For demonstration purposes, we have an environment which has an instance name of Demo Education. We'll set this here. Then we can fill in the email and password of the account we just previously set up. So all queries made to the API will be made under this account, and so the data returned will be based on the access rights of this account. Once we've filled in these 3 fields, we have this function here which is responsible to fetch an authentication token from our API. So just to validate that these parameters are valid and are functioning well, we can just invoke this function here. Now, the first time we do this, we may need to confirm some of the credentials from this type of data source. This is a web type of data source. In this case, we'll just connect to it anonymously by selecting this anonymous option initially, as the authentication will be done in the next steps in the underlying function. Right, so with a successful call, we'll receive this authentication token, which looks something similar to this. So this means that we've established a connection to the Hector API and been able to generate a token. This is an important step as the token will be used throughout the subsequent calls as the way to authenticate to the API. I'll just show you the code of what the function looks like in the advanced editor here. So as we can see, this function will take in the email and password parameter that we've defined previously, and it will connect to the API using this URL in the auth token root of the API, and will pass along also the Hector instance we've also defined previously. So this will submit the information to the API, and in return we will get an access token here, which is what we previously see. So this function is defined here, and it will be reused in other functions later on. Now, if we want to add data at this time to the Power BI report, we can do so using the following function here, which will help us to establish that. So this function takes in a parameter, which is the relative path within the API. So in this case, if I wanted to add users to my report, I can just add in the users path here, invoke this function, and this will initiate a table here. So we can rename this users table. From this point on, we can expand all the records here to see all the available fields that we have in our specific environment. Right, and after this step, it's just regular Power BI manipulations that can be done from this point on. So we can change the data types, we can change the order, remove columns, add new calculations and whatnot. And so this can be done just using the regular Power BI interface, right? So now I've added my first table for users. I can also add a second table if I wanted to for assets. So it's the same idea here. These tables are just calling this getEntities function here, passing along the appropriate path, and this allows us to get our records. So same idea here, I can expand these records and see all the available fields. And in some cases, I may have some other sublists which I can expand, such as this, for example. I'll rename this again to assets. Right, so whatever tables that you need based on the data you want to report on can be done, using this getEntities function. Right, and this is just basically a shortcut to call our API. So if we wanted to see, well, what are these paths here? And what are the names of these paths based on the type of entities we're trying to fetch from Hector, we need to go look at the API documentation in order to find this information. So if I go back to Hector, at the bottom of the screen here is this link to the API documentation here. So this will open this API reference page here. And from here we can see all the different available entities from the system which are exposed through the API. So if we wanted to look at vendors, we can see the route which would list all the vendors here and see that the path would be vendors. So this is what we would add to the Power BI if we wanted to list vendors. So same idea with all these other types of entities here. If we wanted to see stock rooms, we have these stock rooms relative path here. Right, so I can copy this, go back to the function here, invoke the stock rooms, right, and now I have all the information regarding them. I'll just open this function here just to show you what it's responsible for and what it manages. Right, so this function reuses the one we've previously seen that generates an access token. Right, so as part of its header, it will indicate which instance we're pulling data from using which authentication token, which we're generating using this function call. Then, based on the relative path which was provided, we generate a URL with the relative path so that we are fetching from the API in the correct route. Also, most of these queries will just return a maximum of 100 results per page. So if we want to capture all of the results in Power BI, we must enable to do paging across the API to fetch all the records. So if we have 1,000 records, for example, we would need to perform 10 queries if we have a page size of 100 in order to gather all of the results. So this piece of the function is responsible to make a call for a given page for the route we've previously defined. And then here we will iterate through all the different pages as long as we have results. And the result at the end of this is the full list of results for this given relative path. So if this was assets, we would have the full list of assets due to this. Right, so this is a helper function here. It could be copy pasted and changed based on if we wanted to add other query parameters which are available in the API, which are not as standard as this. But these are typically the standard parameters which we will see when we're trying to fetch the full list. So now that I have some of the different tables, I can just close and apply this here. So it's actually making calls to the API to fetch all of the rows available there. And assets is a bit longer as it has to page through the full list of assets one page at a time to fetch the full list. So let's just give it a few more seconds and this will be all loaded here. All right, so as you can see now my tables and their corresponding default fields are all loaded here. So from this point on, we could start building reports. From here, we can link the tables together if we had any keys that enabled us to do so. So we could link the asset stockroom ID to the ID of the stockroom here as an example if we want to establish some different relationships within our model. So we could go on like this and tailor the model to our needs. This is as far as I'll go for this demonstration. Now the next step is making this report available to other users within the organization. So if we want to publish this report to the Power BI service, we can. I'll just create a sample tile here in the report before publishing it. Right, so this just represents the number of users that we have. Now I can publish this to my service as I would any other Power BI report. This is what it looks like within Power BI once I've deployed it. Now I can go and check on my data set that was created with the publishing action here and go to settings. So in order to establish a refresh from the Power BI service, I just need to confirm some of the information here. And I have to check the skip test connection. So this will fix the error here. And then if ever I need to change the password or instance name for some reason, I have the same parameters we've seen in the Power BI Desktop report are available here and can be changed. So once this is all set, now I can establish a refresh either using the schedule to have a daily refresh, for example, based on the frequency I need. Otherwise, I can also go and head to my data set itself and hit the refresh now option for a manual refresh. And using the connection parameters established in the settings of the dataset, it will connect to the API and fetch the most up-to-date data for our report. And that's how we can set up Power BI to fetch data from the Hector API.